Good morning. As Larry and I prepared for this talk, we were challenged to present our talk in light of Unity teachings. And so we went to the Unity Worldwide Ministries website and found this official Unity statement about peace, as seen on the slide behind me. And I can't read it from there, but I'll read it here. From the Unity website, Statement for Peace. Unity stands for peace in the presence of conflict, for love in the presence of hatred, for forgiveness in the presence of injury. Unity honors the many names for God, the many paths to God, the many ways to worship God, for there is only one power and one presence of God, and that God loves each one of us equally. Now, this is the part we usually don't know about. It is therefore the position of Unity Worldwide Ministries and Unity World Headquarters at Unity Village to urge all nations, their leaders, and their people to turn to God, but by whatever the name, for guidance during these challenging times, and pursue peace, not war, for this is what honors the God of all our faith traditions. Unity stands for peace in our lifetime. We also discovered that the timing of our talk today coincided with the United Nations International Day of Peace tomorrow. The theme this year is Shaping Peace Together, a message to show that cooperation across borders, sectors, and generations are needed, in this case, and I quote, to get a grip on the worst public health crisis of our time. But Shaping Peace Together also seems to be the perfect title of our talk today. You see, 25 or so years ago, there was a personal family situation that really brought me to my knees. I wasn't a churchgoer at the time, and I was a complete wreck. A dear friend of mine suggested that I try Unity to find some peace of mind, and when I did, my world changed. The message that I got loud and clear from Unity then was to let go and let God. Until letting go and letting God, I had always believed that if you made the right choices and you did the right things, that all those dots would connect and all would be well. Well, what I learned at Unity was that there was a lot of space between those dots. And that space I like to call God space or divine order space, something like that. Divine order being another key principle in the Unity teachings, which I had never heard before. Those two key Unity principles, let go and let God, and divine order, kept me coming back to hear and study the Unity message, which made so much sense. So now, it's present day, and by this time I have relished in the words of our weekly service that Unity is not a religion, and we've heard it twice already today, but a path for spiritual living, and that here we welcome all paths to God. Those words, Unity welcomes all paths to God, is why Larry and I are here together talking with you today. So, here's an admission. Larry and I went to the same schools, 1st through 12th grade together, but we didn't know each other very well. We grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, best known for the Mennonite and the Amish people, and they're very different. Plain people, as they were called. The plain people, Larry, and the fancy people, moi, did not do a whole lot of mixing at that time. And I discovered 3 years ago when Larry entered my life that I had been harboring over 60 years of stereotypical prejudice against what I thought was his uptight, ultra-conservative, grim Mennonite religion. But the unity concept of welcoming all paths to God kept playing through my mind and opened me up to meeting with him. So 50 some years since high school, and here we are. Letting go and letting God, divine order, and respecting all paths to God. All this in action. The big surprise, another big surprise in this was the discovery that I'm a descendant of one of the original Mennonite settlers who came to Pennsylvania in 1695. And just as an aside, he was able to gain his citizenship from Switzerland because he grew grain to make whiskey for the troops, the British troops. So, more common ground, and quite shocking to me. This common ground put us on a quest to learn more about our heritage, and the takeaway for this talk today, as it relates to unity, is the word peace in action. At Unity, we believe that peace begins with me. It's an inside job. We've heard that so many times. That we are the power of peace expressed in thoughts, words, and deeds. That we are one with the power of divine peace. How easy it is to say these words. How humbled we are, Larry and I, by the hardship of our ancestors for living these words. And now Larry will be talking with us about living peace through non-resistance, forgiveness, and faith in Jesus' teachings from another group's historical perspective.
Well, just as Sherry's ancestor founded a town and a specific congregation, my great-grandfather was an ordained deacon for 38 years in that same church in the late 1800s. We knew little about our common roots until we explored the cemetery and reviewed a genealogical history. As we became more intrigued with our common roots, we decided to take an historical tour last June to 7 European countries, mainly Switzerland, where our families grew up within miles of one another. That group of people, ancient stirrings in the early 1500s, were called pacifists, or Wiedertäufer, literally rebaptist, or translated Anabaptist, sometimes also called the Radical Reformers. This humble group of people rose from a scattered body, of believers initiated by various priests of the Catholic Church, primarily Mennonites, who espoused a main concept of adult baptism and promoted a life of peace. 5 core beliefs founded what became a major stirring and a predicament to the state and the national church in Europe, beginning about the time of Luther and his 95 Theses in 1517. Menno Simons, a Catholic priest, traveled extensively throughout the Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland, proclaiming the Bible to be read by all, and along with other priests and laypersons promoted these 5 precepts: adult baptism, separation of church and state, the refusal to make or take an oath. Refusal to take up arms or weapons. This statement was made in a reply to false accusations in 1552 by Menno Simons, who says, "The Prince of Peace is Jesus Christ. We who were formerly no people at all, and who knew of no peace, are now called to be a church of peace. True Christians do not know vengeance. They are the children of peace. Their hearts overflow with peace. Their mouths speak peace, and they walk in the way of peace." The fifth is a visible evidence of beliefs, and this is a service to others. This person, Benjamin Hershey, who was a Mennonite minister in 1776, wrote this: "We have dedicated ourselves to serve people in everything that can be helpful to the preservation of one's lives, but we find no freedom in giving or doing or assisting in anything by which one's lives are destroyed or hurt." This service or outreach theme is a watchword for the Anabaptists to this day. Theologians would call these 5 precepts as having come from a more literal interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount. I'm going to focus this morning on the last 2 of these fundamentals. Boosted by continual wars, the invention of the Gutenberg press, and subsequent printing of the Bible in the common language of the people, these Anabaptist themes became a popular belief for many. Oppression and taxation by the ruling aristocracy, the burden of church tithes, the selling of indulgences, the graft in both the church and the state, and the promoting of non-biblical concepts provided a ripe environment for people to resist in an abstaining, pacifistic way. These Anabaptists carried no weapons, and many were originally city folk, comprised of professions like weavers, blacksmiths, tailors, goldsmiths, potters, bookbinders, sawers of wood, coopers, and you name it. But because of their faith, were pursued in the cities where they fled into the mountains to become dairy, herd, and crop farmers. These tradespeople and others who at one time comprised nearly 1/3 of the population in Germany and Switzerland now became a scorn to the church. And the same Catholic Church members who also ran the state profited from a close connection to the national church, which was used as a conduit for financing extravagant cathedrals, wars, and ruling landowners' acquisition of property through taxation. One can see here during the period of 1525 to 1550, the blue would be the area of Germany, the green Switzerland, the purple Netherlands, the yellow Moravia, and then to the top right as far as Poland. The sphere of influence was those areas. Both the church and the state inflicted death upon thousands of these Anabaptist leaders, 1/3 of them women, as well as ordained ministers and faithful students of the Bible, who were reading now with their own eyes, finding scripture that was not being preached or taught in the cathedrals. The indulgences, taxes for new children being baptized at birth, and burdensome tithes that were placed upon the church members were excruciating for all the people. The freedom of religion was an obstruction for these people, but the Anabaptist practices were for the state and church a most severe economic and military loss. But why? The reason was because the church and state were not getting the taxes levied on newborn baptized children, as the Anabaptists believed that God was good, God was the truth, God was in everyone, and that people should choose when to be baptized or transformed into a life of faith. The problem was that until a person was baptized, they were an unknown entity to this state, unrecorded, so they and their parents were considered tax evaders, cheaters, unfaithful and disloyal to the Pope, the king, and the government, weeds and thorns to be gotten rid of. They were to be made an example to deter others from following this path. This group of people, the Anabaptists, worshiped in secret caves and were constantly on the move, hunted down with thousands being martyred or burned at the stake, beheaded, or drowned in an attempt to thwart the wide-scale departure from the state church and the resources that the people provided, including being mercenary soldiers. Sherry and I had the opportunity to visit this cave high in the mountains on a secret path. And in that cave, the number of us that were in attendance sang the song that we close our service here with each Sunday, "Let there be peace on earth," as the chills went up and down our back. Not only were these in the mountainous or forested areas, but also in the cities. They had hidden cellars. This, of the Roman times, was built, and Sherry's ancestor actually worshiped here in the 1600s, and his name was found on a bill of which the Swiss are meticulous in keeping records, the number of people and the date in which they attended this service. In the Netherlands, where the Anabaptists were more openly accepted, they still did not want to have its prominence or their prominence displayed. So they asked, and this is from the 1600s, to build something that looks like all the regular houses. And as we went into that, in the back was a room large enough for 50 to 70 people, but otherwise you wouldn't know it was there. How did people get to these caves, and how did they traverse around through the countryside? Through these forest trails, much like in the States we had the Underground Railroad. Well, the state and the church were essentially the same, and they were furious that this group would not pledge allegiance to the king or pope, or to carry weapons to fight in the Swiss army, nor believe that the church and the state should be entwined and synonymous and serve as the sole authority with dominion over all the people. The name Anabaptist became known as neither being Protestant nor especially Catholic, but a third way and a way of peace. This resistance created massive problems if war were to continue, but curiously enough, the Crusades ceased when Columbus discovered America in 1492. The Renaissance had begun as well throughout Europe, and combined with what was later to be known as the Reformation, caused a major upheaval in the status quo of religion and state control that had to be squelched by the authorities. This group of people, the Anabaptists, were literally slaughtered and chased from their homes. Exiled from the cities, they were now subjected to live in the higher rocky altitudes, away from the authorities and safety, and for safety and fearing of their lives. This countryside is shown from Stockhorn Mountain at 7,000 feet above sea level. Other indigenous persons were not willing to suffer such hardships, and that's why this pretty but uninviting land was available for the Anabaptists to farm. Well, as the pursuit continued, these people finally migrated to safe surrounding havens of France, the Alsace-Lorraine area, Netherlands, Moravia, and eventually to America, where they could worship with freedom, not only in peace with their fellow humans, but also with the land. For years, they were worshiping in secret, traveling secret trails in the mountains and woods, known only to the local people, and these trails were later used by the Jewish people escaping from Nazi Germany in the late 20s throughout the 30s and early 40s. Today, Anabaptist, called an original peace church, along with Quakers, Church of the Brethren, and Amish, number about 4 million worldwide, and live with a motto from Menno Simons that outlines the way of peace from 1552. And this says, "Our weapons are not weapons with which cities and countries may be destroyed, walls and gates broken down, and human blood shed in torrents like water. But they are weapons with which the spiritual kingdom of the devil is destroyed." From these humble beginnings, this group has not only shown they were living their faith, but showing that one's liberation cannot come at the cost of someone else's suffering, but also being willing to die for it. A motto for recent Anabaptists forming new congregations have used this etching of Dirk Willems, a Dutch martyr. Sherry will now provide some background and history of this early Anabaptist death in 1569.
Dirk Willems was a Catholic priest in the Netherlands in the early 1500s who started to doubt the taking up of the sword and infant baptism. He began preaching against both and was in fact rebaptized, or transformed if you like. For that he was imprisoned and escaped by fleeing across a frozen pond with his captor in hot pursuit. The captor fell through the ice, and Willems went back and rescued him in an act of profound compassion. He was living his creed, his truth, but for this act of mercy, he was burned at the stake. We mention this today because the Dirk Willems story is key to understanding the Anabaptist theology and its growth now in countries all over the world, from A to Z, Albania to Zimbabwe, where this story factors keenly in the development of new churches, particularly in African countries, as well as amongst our own United States, African American, and Spanish populations. It seems that, while it might not look like it, peace is where the heart is.
And where did these Anabaptists eventually flee to? America, Russia, then Canada, Paraguay, Mexico, Belize, and now to the uttermost parts of the earth. Attempting to be faithful peacemakers, their mission is to serve others by supporting all methods of utilitarian benefits for the oppressed and the needy. William Penn, a Quaker, invited these known pacifists and industrious people to Pennsylvania in the late 1600s, and Sherry and my ancestors answered that call. Ask us about some prominent names and organizations that exist around the world today that you might be familiar with, who were and are Anabaptists. There is a heavy emphasis on outreach and service. A few decades ago, a meme was circulating about Mennonites and their organizational skills. The saying was that if a plane had engine failure and passengers had to parachute, if there were 4 Mennonites aboard, before they hit the ground, there would be a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. We leave you with this challenge for us today. Can we live a life of peace in our lifetime? Will we put our life and faith on the line to be a witness for peace here in our community and in our world? Is it important enough that we can live in an active way to encourage others and to live peacefully ourselves? Peace begins with me, with us. We remember Debrie's message from the other week to let our thoughts take action. From the wall hangings up front this morning, let's love for peace. Let's hope for peace. Let us pray for peace, and let us live for peace. I impart to you the full blessing from today's daily word, taken from what Aaron read, but from the full text, Numbers 6, 24 to 26. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord's face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be upon you and give you peace.